Welcome. Hello. My name's Gareth Sturdy. I'm one of the organisers of the Academy of Ideas Education Forum. And this discussion today is organised by the Education Forum and also the Academy of Ideas Parents Forum. So if you're interested in what those groups do and would like to know more about it, come and talk to me at the end, and I can give you some more information about that. So when I was coming up with a title for this debate, I thought Square-Eyed Screenagers sounded a really sort of snazzy title until I realised I'd have to say it. So I think I've just got away with it. But Square-Eyed Screenagers, we know what we're talking about. We're talking about whether phones and digital technology is in some way corrupting or ruining or spoiling our children. So I don't intend to sort of give a huge introduction to this issue. I think it's something that we're all sort of worried about, all familiar with. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel, and I'm going to introduce them in the order that they're going to speak in. But I'll just say that each speaker, we've got quite a large panel, so each speaker is only going to have 4 minutes, okay? I'm going to try and police that quite firmly. Let's see how we get on with that. But they're just going to introduce a few themes, and then I'm going to come straight out to yourselves, okay? I'm sure people have got all sorts of opinions on this. So we want to kind of get people in and include the audience as much as possible. So who's the first to speak? The first is to my immediate left, which is Molly Kingsley, co-founder of Us for Them, which I think I'm right in saying that's a group that started during lockdown, isn't it? Subsequently, the group has written a report called The Children's Inquiry, looking specifically at this issue of how lockdowns affected children, particularly the school closures. And now you have the Safe Screens campaign, is that right? Which Molly's going to tell us about in a moment. So after Molly, we'll hear from Professor Sir Simon Wesley, interim Dean of the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neurosciences, and also Regius Professor of Psychiatry at King's College London. So hopefully he's going to be able to give us chapter and verse on the psychology of mobile devices and how they might affect children. Well, we'll see what happens. But after Simon, then we're going to hear from Joe Nutt, who is in the middle on my right-hand side here. Joe's an international education consultant. He's the author of a number of books, The Point of Poetry, an introduction to Shakespeare's late plays, and a guidebook to Paradise Lost. So Joe is very familiar with the sort of business of educating children. He's going to give his insight into how digital technology interacts with education, and that's a key part of this debate, I think. And then after Joe, on my right here, we've got Elliot Buick. And Elliot, I have to reassure, is not the token young person on this panel, okay? But I'm really delighted that in the audience, we've got a number of young people. Well, we've got a spread of ages here, and I think that's really important because we might be into a sort of intergenerational miscommunication going on here. So Elliot is going to give his perspective. Elliot is the producer of the Trigonometry podcast, which I think is doing something from the Battle of Ideas, or certainly we've got people from Trigonometry around talking on debates. So it's great to have Elliot here. And finally, by no means least, at the end of the table is Josephine Hussey. Josephine is a school teacher, primary school teacher, and she's also with me on the Education Forum from the Academy of Ideas. So it's great to have Josephine here as well. There's a lot of speakers. Can we just give a quick round of applause to thank our speakers? And hopefully that's not the only applause we're going to get. I think we'll start off with Molly. Off you go, Molly.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Molly Kingsley, and I'm one of the founders of a group called a group called Us for Them. And Us for Them started during the height of school closures. And one of our concerns at the time was what it does, and really seeing the impact on our own children when you switch kids' lives from full school, play, socialisation to screens. And I think we weren't really quite prepared for the legacy that lockdown would leave, because I think it's fair to say that we've never gone entirely back to the world we were in pre-lockdown. So to a greater or lesser degree, remote learning, remote teaching has become accepted, normalised, certainly more common than it was. And as parents, we have real concerns about aspects of EdTech and in particular smartphones. And to frame this conversation, let me just give you a little story. So this is a true story told to me a few months ago by a friend, and she said that her friend's child is about 11, and she went to a party in the middle of the summer. It was a stargazing party, and it sounded idyllic. It was camping in a garden, stargazing. And when my friend went to pick up her daughter the next day, the daughter was really, really upset. And the reason, and I'm sure you'll all guess where I'm going with this, but there were 6 kids there. And of the 6 kids, my friend's daughter was the only one without a phone. And the other 5 kids had spent, according to my friend, pretty much the entire evening into the small hours looking not at the stars, but on Instagram. And my friend and her daughter were very upset. They were very frustrated. So the daughter felt very lonely and left out, as you might expect. And for me, that little story just sums up so much of where we are with smartphones and children. And there's been a lot of focus on the content on smartphones. For me, that is the wrong way of looking at this. I think, there's certainly a whole array, a whole world of really awful content that, frankly, probably most adults don't want to come into contact with, let alone children. And the smartphone is definitely a gateway to that. I have concerns about the way we are trying to deal with that via the online safety bill. I think that opens up a whole different host of issues. I also don't think it is going to solve the problem, but I think it's going to scratch the surface of the problem, actually, when it comes to children and smartphones. Because I think what we have with a smartphone is an addictive, by design, device that we've given to our kids. I mean, we've given it to ourselves too, separate issue, but we've given it to our kids and we've said, good luck with that. This really addictive, pernicious piece of technology that we've given to them to have in their pockets. And, this isn't the evidence, and there is a huge amount of evidence on this now. And you can argue around the edges of causation, and certainly there are other factors. I don't think anyone is saying that smartphones are the only cause of children's mental health issues, but there is an abundance of evidence to suggest a very, very strong correlation that started around the time smartphone penetration exceeded 50% of the markets, both here in Canada and US. And I don't think you can argue with that now. You have an addictive by design device that we've given to children, and the evidence, as with any addiction, suggests that this isn't a mildly distracting piece of hardware. It is a device that is overtaking children's lives, and it's shattering. In fact, I would say it's shattering an entire cohort of young lives. And for all the evidence and all the studies which speak to an array of harms, for me, the simplest data is actually the starkest, and that is just time spent on the devices. So 91, this is Ofcom data, 91% of 11-year-olds own a smartphone. On average, they spend 3 hours, 20 minutes a day on those devices. 98% of 12 to 15-year-olds, and a staggering 1/5 of 3 to 4-year-olds. And I don't think you have to get beyond that to understand that we have replaced a play and socialisation-based childhood with a screen-based childhood. And it is not a future that I am prepared to accept for my kids, one of whom is sat here and knows we have very strong views on this. So, yeah, that is what I have to say.
Thank you very much. Not meaning to be rude to the panel, but I think we'll keep our applause right to the end, okay, just so we can keep on moving. But you've got nice unfair. Simon, it's addictive. What can you tell us about the psychology?
I don't think it's addictive in the way a psychiatrist would use the word addiction, to be honest. But I take the points that you're making. Now, I do quite a lot of things like this. And one thing I do beforehand is I usually look at the title on Google the night before and see what daft things there have been in the newspapers about this in the last 24 hours. So I was doing a thing on the crisis in mental health last week, And a quick check the night before, and you can check this yourself. CNN led with the story, and I'm just going to read what it actually said. It said that a crisis in mental health is the greatest threat to American democracy at the moment. And it just made me laugh, because I thought, the greatest threat? I'm sure there's another. I just can't put my finger on who that might be. But that was that you don't normally hit pay dirt quite so quickly for a really daft headline. So you can do this yourself. If you look at screen time, and you'll find yesterday's highlight was the Sydney Morning Herald, a very distinguished newspaper. And that was saying, it was on screen time. It wasn't actually so much about mental health. It was actually about the excessive screen time, or more screen time, is destroying our children's eyesight. That's a slightly new one, but it had all the features of these stories. So first of all, it has the word children, always, uses the word epidemic. It's based on voodoo statistics, so it's always about there are more people seeing. Well, seeing was not quite the point in this one, but more people, using our helpline, visiting our surgery, whatever it is. It had all of that. It had came from a group with a major interest in this, which was optometrists who were out to make money from this. So it ticked all the boxes for all of these stories. And in the end, it also said that the problem with use of these things, it prevents people from going outdoors. And at the same time, the next story, you can check and just do this, I'm not making this up, the Hindustani Times said this is now a story linking screens with heart disease. How you do that, I really don't know. And by the way, I'm actually an epidemiologist. By the way, that's what I do for a living. At least I don't have to explain to you a lot what that means anymore. I've spent 35 years telling people what it means. Now they all know. And that said, this is because, among other things, they cause us to disconnect from our surroundings. So this is a common trope. There's something about the use of mobile technology, etc., that is separating us from the real. And Molly, I just want to quote you on this. And you said, the greatest curse brought down on us by technology is that it prevents us from escaping from the present, even for a brief time. Do you remember that?
I actually don't.
No, you don't, because I made it up. No, I didn't. I didn't make it up. But actually, you can play this. Most people would immediately, I can see people nodding and agreeing with that. But that's actually Stefan Zweig writing in 1942 in his last work, looking back on the decline of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the night after he finished this, he sent the book off, and then he and his wife took their own lives. This is 1942, being Jewish, so there were lots of reasons for that. But it's a common thing that we have, is to blame the medium for the message and to be concerned and worried about whatever the technology change is on that it's raising social ills. Be it printing, be it TV, be it newspapers, you will find the same things. So I'd say then three things to end up. First of all, don't blame the medium for the message. Second, the scientific literature go, I would say it's not as strong as you'd think, actually. Much of it is about correlation, and you use the correlation statistic. That is not the same as causation. Two things happening at the same time does not prove cause and effect. And when you look at it from the epidemiological point of view, yes, there definitely are leaps, there's no doubt, but they're not actually that strong. And the strongest effects on children's mental health and well-being have not changed for some time. Being abuse, physical and sexual, being poverty, being bullying, most of which is still face-to-face, being early use of drugs and so on. And I don't want this debate on screen time to obscure the things that we know affect children's mental health, but are actually really grown up and very difficult problems, not easy to solve with legislation or quick reaction, over quick reactions. And you were right when you said about the online safety bill. That's exactly the kind of thing that actually may not work. So please wrap up now. I'm very happy to wrap up.
Happy for you to finish at that point. Simon, that's great. So the evidence perhaps is not as strong as Molly might have suggested. Sorry, I'm going to have to remember this every time, aren't I? Thank you. Elliot, when, me and your dad are about the same age, and when we were kids, they told us that if we watch too much TV, we'll develop square eyes and, it'll be really bad for us. And now they're telling you to get off your phone. Is it just a sort of repeat of this kind of endless concern that we have with kids doing the wrong sort of thing? What's your feeling towards digital technology?
Well, I think on the square eyes point, that's very different. That was based off nothing. That was just a moral panic. Whereas I think there's more substance to this. And really what we're dealing with is a battle with the programmers of these apps themselves. Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. The incentive is to have as much engagement as possible. And at the end of the day, these people want to make money from our engagement. So algorithms are geared towards what we want. And that comes with awful consequences. So a lot of people I know my age, they self-diagnose with specific problems like depression, anxiety. And once they get onto that spiral, it just keeps on going because the algorithms feed them more and more content, basically backing up their points. So it's very easy with these apps to get into echo chambers. And on the other hand, I do think there are positive echo chambers as well. You can get into great communities where you are all about mindset, about self-improvement. So there's so much to be harnessed from social media. We're just not doing it. Personally, my story, I've grown up on screens. I'm the same age as YouTube. I'm a year older than Twitter. And I've grown up in Brighton. So that's a very interesting part of the world to see all these extreme events unfold, especially the last 3 years. And under lockdown, I basically picked up my mum's photography camera, my mum's old photography camera, and I just said, teach me everything. This is my project for lockdown. And she did. And within 6 months, I was able to watch YouTube tutorials, teaching me more and more about cameras. And eventually within a year, I think I was 15, I was filming my first brand deal for a small fitness brand. So there's so much to be harnessed from this powerful communication device. And if you use it rightly, in the right way, you can build a career from it, as I have done. My whole career is built from screens. So I don't want to be sat here criticizing technology and saying it should be banned, these phones, but I'm very aware of the consequences, and I see it with my friends. I see it all around me, the impact on mental health. Another thing I've noticed is an increase in cynicism, and it's almost as if you're being shown all these ideas of you can make it in life, you can get a Bugatti if you do this. And you'd think that people would be motivated by that, but they're not. They're almost scared off, and they're kind of going into these protective huddles and just being critical of everything, being cynical. Because if you're cynical, you're always going to win. If you do well, great. If not, I told you so. So there's been a real development of cynicism, and I think that's also been reinforced by these echo chambers going on. Nothing's your fault. This is another point that I'm really keen to make, is that social media basically promotes ideas that sound good, but they don't actually work in reality. So we need to get to a point where we return to ideas that sound bad, but actually work. And on social media, that's very difficult to do. People want to be spoon-fed motivation saying they can do this, they can do that. And it's awful. So there's all of that going on. And there's self-prescribed depression that I've talked about. However, I just have a stat to pull out that is between 2012 and 2019, the suicide rate for middle-aged white men in America, it went up by 3%. For girls aged 10 to 14, it went up 138%. So there are echo chambers, people are self-prescribing, unrightly so, but I really do think that there is a real problem here as well for social media on the impact, especially on young girls' mental health, body image. Again, we're being shown all these influencers who live this lavish life, and they've effectively created their own cult of personality. That's what social media allows us to do. It allows us to create a cult of personality for ourselves. But really, having spent time with all these different success stories and celebrities, their 24 hours is very different to what you see on Instagram. You see the highlights, and people get disheartened, they get body dysmorphia because they think their 24 hours is the 10 seconds you see on an Instagram story, but it's really not. So I want to come with the message that you don't need filters to look good. You don't need to pretend. You can be yourself. And when you take a video of yourself enjoying your time with your friends, you don't need to go on a body app and distort your waist to make yourself look like Kim Kardashian, who, by the way, is also using face tuning. So we need to get back to reality. We need to stop purporting ideas that sound good but don't actually work. And we need to realize that the people you see on social media, if they've been asked to comment about something,
I'm going to ask you to stop there because otherwise everyone else is going to get really
Okay.
upset that you
if they've been bothered to comment about something, they really care about the issue, whereas actually it's the silent majority. So the people you see commenting, they're at one end of the extremity.
That's really interesting, Elliot, because I suspected that a token young person might turn up and sort of just give us a kind of full-throated defence of mobile phones. But it's interesting that you share some of these concerns that are coming out as well. So that's really interesting. Joe, I'm really sorry. I was supposed to come to you next. I was too busy looking at my phone and I went straight to Elliot. So forgive me for getting the order wrong already. But anyway, Joe, what's your perspective?
No problem. Right. Okay. So a bit of audience participation, words to put the fear of God into all of you. What's the biggest annual education event in the UK? Anybody? Dave? It's BET. It's BET. It used to be the British Educational Training and Technology Show. Last year, around 22,500 people attended it. Amongst them were 549 government employees. In comparison, Wellington's Festival of Education, some of you may know, that attracts about 4,000. The academies show about 6,000. Now, I'm not going to waste any of my precious 4 minutes giving you any other stats than those. I've spent so many years reading educational research for clients, I am way too jaded. What I'm going to do is resort entirely to anecdotes. I actually place a lot of trust in anecdotes, because often good anecdotes really cut through the nonsense and they give you a valuable insight into the real world, especially in education. Now, I first exhibited at BET in 2001 in a tiny little space with an equally tiny tech startup. The next year, I was with a medium-sized space working for the business that ran the huge London Grid for Learning. And then for years after that, I worked in the back rooms that you never see at BET, where the real business takes place for one of the show's main sponsors. Now, the big point, and really the only main point I want to make, is simple. The reason mobile phones are in schools at all is because business wants them to be. If you want to remove them, you will have to take those businesses on, because all politicians I've come across in all major parties are completely in awe of what Silicon Valley sells them. That's why 549 government figures were at BET last year. They were schmoozing with executives, looking for the job they will need when the voters get rid of them. One of the major research projects I worked on was to design some research with a small team from the Institute of Education to look at whether the digital divide existed or not. At the time, Silicon Valley sales teams were walking all over politicians and their purse holders, convincing them there was this huge gap in technology between the rich and the poor. There wasn't. But digital divide, just like digital natives, was a brilliantly effective sales pitch. My team interviewed hundreds of kids, and I can still remember one interview in particular with a boy who was in care. In his interview, he managed to convey something that I've never forgotten, and I'd never seen it before. He hated his phone because every night he stayed up until the early hours because he didn't want to be the last one to log off. And he used this phrase for it. I've never forgotten it. He called it a devil device. And this is a long time ago, this piece of research. Now, what I'm hoping to convince you is that until the teaching profession grasps who has really been jerking its strings for decades now, it doesn't matter that much whether or not you ban mobile phones in schools, because they will be replaced with something equally detrimental as long as it's profitable. Now, I left teaching to work in the technology business, largely because at the time I thought technology was going to dramatically change the nature of the job, and I didn't want to be on the receiving end. If there's going to be change, I wanted to be one of those people making sure it was educationally valuable. Now, I find my naivety now, in retrospect, quite amusing. I got the first part right, but the idea that Silicon Valley was the least interested in high-quality teaching, good schooling, or what constitutes a worthwhile educational experience just showed how little I knew about business. Right, I'm going to finish with one more anecdote, not least because it illustrates perfectly what I've been saying, and it is a gem. When I worked for the company that ran the London Grid for Learning, we released a new version of the product, and I was the first member of the sales team to organise a demonstration for potential customers. After a lot of hard work, I managed to set up a presentation for a whole bunch of head teachers at Epsom College. Now, the company's chief executive decided this was so important that he would invite himself along. Now, this was at the time when the internet connections were sometimes untrustworthy. Now, I had a plan B in case the live thing failed, but sure enough, it did fail. But my chief executive was the sort of guy who was a real control freak. He literally jumped up, pushed me to one side, and then he stood up and he talked for about 20 minutes using all the kind of technology, innovative technology lingo he would use with a bunch full of coders, talking about sales jargon, all that sort of stuff in front of this group of head teachers. Yeah, I'm nearly there. And after about 20 minutes, he literally turned to these people and he said, okay, I've got another a meeting to go to, much more important, bye-bye, and off he went. And he left me standing in front of this room full of head teachers. And I said, okay, are there any questions? This is absolutely true. One of these nice public school head teachers put his hand up and he said exactly this. He said, yes, what was all that bollocks about? Now, unfortunately, what happens is the politicians and the people they give the purse strings to never ask that question.
Thanks very much. Joe, I just want to ask the audience a minute. On the assumption that probably most people in here use a smartphone, put up your hand if you think that your smartphone is a bit of a devil device. You know, if you think you spend too much time on it, that look at that. Wow. I didn't expect it to be. That's almost everybody in the room. That's really interesting. Okay, thank you. Well, that's one side of education. Josephine, what's it actually like with smartphones in primary schools these days?
So I've prepared for slightly longer, so I'm going to try and scoot through what I've said. I wanted to look at three things: how it affects their mental health and well-being. But I think Simon's dealt with that. So because I really don't think the evidence is there to say that there's a strong connection between mental health and the use of phones. So I'm going to just jump and not talk about that too much. The world they open up to teenagers and children is dangerous. Sophie Winkleman in Unheard said, if teenagers use brick phones only capable of calling and texting, instead of portals to time-wasting cyberbullying, self-harm chat rooms, pro-anorexia forums and terrifying violent porn, children would be calmer, happier, healthier, better rested and more able to focus in school. So she's got a very strong idea of what she thinks children are up to on their phones. But this is the rub. Often we as parents and educators don't know what they're looking at, and it's scary to think they may have access to unsuitable material that could influence them. However, we have to remember that they're not blank slates. Their social circumstances often dictate what they look at, their interests and their curiosity, as has been evidenced by the interest in photography. In addition, in a technological world, we teach them how to negotiate technology safely and model it ourselves. The influences on those children often represent their social conditions and are not always nice, but are a social problem rather than a smartphone problem. We don't consider the benefits, such as the ability to socialise, the knowledge that can be gleaned from social media, and the opening up of the world virtually to them. Because as parents, we want to protect them from all those risks. However, as parents, we know from the moment they start to crawl and walk that we can't. We can guide them and advise them, but we can't do it for them. I remember my anecdote. I had a conversation with my daughter when she was 14, and I insisted on looking at her phone because she was being cagey. Later that day, she said to me, "Mum, can I have a word?" And she said, "I don't think you should look at my phone anymore." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, you've taught me, and you told me you trust me, and you've got to let me get on with it." And I thought, actually, she's right. She's 14. And the boundary now is loosening, and I think she needs to be trusted to get on with it. We can guide them and advise them, but we can't do it for them. The final issue is their ability to concentrate, which has just been touched on. I teach year 6. They give me their phones in the morning. I put them in my desk drawer for the day, and I give them back to them when they go home. These pupils range in their ability to focus, and my job is to put them in situations where I remove distractions and help them learn how to focus for longer and longer. Life is full of distractions, and as we learn and grow, we learn how to remove them. While they're growing as the adults in their lives, we help them to develop this ability. My main argument, however, against the banning of mobile phones is that it infantilises us as adults. I do not understand why we need the DfE government to make it statutory for schools to stop phones being used in schools. Schools know they want to focus on children learning and avoid distraction, and head teachers should have the authority, without the need for edicts, to have phones in lockers with the teacher for the day or whatever way they want to enforce such restrictions. The fact head teachers don't feel brave enough to decide for themselves is a problem for adult authority. In addition, if you as a parent don't want your child to have a smartphone, you can do that. It is within your remit while they live under your roof. Why do we need to ask for that authority from the state? Parents decide on their own rules and relationships with their children, and as shown with my example of my own daughter, negotiate the boundaries along the way. We need to defend adult autonomy and not call on the powers that be to give us that authority. We can decide for our pupils and we can decide for our children. Otherwise, we become children and the state decides for us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If we could thank all the speakers. You get your applause now. Okay, look, well, I'm going to come out to the audience now, but just to sort of disentangle some of these different strands. We are debating all sorts of things, okay? First of all, this discussion is about digital devices, phones being the epitome of those, amongst young people generally, right? But in addition to that, we've got what happens within schools. And I think this has become a big part of the debate. It's not the only part, but it's a big part. And maybe, you know, the rules of what happens in schools is different to what we might want to see in wider society. And I think I'm right, am I not, Molly, that your campaign at Us for Them is looking for a kind of up to 16 years old ban on devices completely.
Been portrayed in the media as that. We've never said that. So first of all, we've deliberately not touched ed tech. We haven't touched ed tech. We think there's different issues. It doesn't mean we're supportive of ed tech, but we think that's a whole different minefield. So I think one thing at a time. And we don't actually use the word ban. We say the phone needs to be made safe for children. So, you know, I think we would say an addictive by design product that, you know, I think it's been said that aims to monetize children's attention is by its nature non-suitable for children. But you can imagine a very pared back I'm not even going to call it a smartphone, wise phone, let's say, that had travel apps, it had, you know, GPRS, it had textability. Like that, I think most parents would be okay with.
Okay. And I just want to clear up something else that I read. These kind of tobacco-style warnings and so on, you are advocating for that kind of
Yeah,
warning.
I mean, and I think for we'd say all smartphones, it's a dangerous product, we would say, slap a warning on it. So, you know, let's not call it a smartphone, it's a dumb phone.
Okay, so we've got that kind of attitude towards devices. We've got, as has been sort of alluded to, the Education Secretary has given guidance to schools saying that phones should be banned. It's not statutory, but then there was a little bit of a warning when the Education Secretary gave this announcement saying, you know, if heads don't follow my guidance, then it will be statutory. So, you know, sort of a kind of iron fist in the velvet glove on that one. But so we've got in schools, but then we've got online learning, which is a different sort of inflection of this kind of whole idea of devices and kids. And then we've got sort of technology in general as to how kids use these things. They're not just Snapchatting, you know, they use an awful lot of digital technology throughout their life. So we've got these kind of different strands. That's the parameters of what we're talking about at the moment. But let's go out to you. Can I see the people with the mics, please? Oh, we've got one here and we've got one here. Okay, so I'm going to start in the middle, actually. If you could come to the middle, and I've got a lady here, and then I've got the lady sort of second in on the row here. If we take those two, and I'm going to bring in some more. So I'm going to take several points and then get the panel to respond on those several points. Okay, so off we go.
Right, perhaps to throw another theme in, I was interested in Molly's anecdote about the child going to the stargazing. And I've heard other anecdotes about that when perhaps schools have taken children on adventure trips. You know, used to go on that week adventure trip, and the whole idea was to get children to be independent, to do orienteering or independent things, but also the beginning of being independent from their parents. This might be the first time they were away, and to learn that growing independent. And sometimes schools say, we don't want them to take their smartphones because this is the outcome. And all the parents go, no, we need to be in constant contact. You know, what if something dangerous happens to them? So I just wondered what the panel thought about that dependency as well that the smartphone creates.
I think that's a really important point, the parental safety aspect of this. You know, if your kid goes to school, where are they? Are they coming home safely? All of that kind of stuff, really, really important. Okay, over here.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make the point sort of, you mentioned the printing press over here, and like the printing press wasn't exactly a non-explosive technology to introduce. So I'd say that that's even more of a reason to take smartphones quite seriously. But I would say, though, that there is this like, I take your point about parents, and that it seems like although there's a problem of kids being exposed to things, there's also a problem of parents being overly involved in their kids' lives and really taking a kind of extreme interest. You know, I've had friends where their parents would be pinged when they left the home, and we'd get messages. And it seemed like we were never really allowed to just like be on our own, get lost, our parents not knowing where we were for a few hours. So I wonder whether the problem is just as much with the way the parents see the smartphones and see that constant contact with kids, as much as this thing about phones. And then I think there's also some common sense that's sometimes lost when it comes to smartphones, like the idea that kids are staying up all night on their phones. I mean, no parent would, I was always not allowed to read comic books all night. My parents would take away my Donald Duck papers. Like, similarly, I think, you know, parents shouldn't let their kids be on the phone all night, but that doesn't seem to be anything you need to regulate. That's just sort of, don't think of the smartphone as this like wild thing that you could never take away from a kid.
That's great. Thank you very much. I think that common sense theme is really interesting. Okay, if the mic can go to the gentleman just there, but we've got one down here to start with. Yep.
Okay. There's a lot going on in this conversation, so I'll try and be as brief as I can. I really appreciate your comments on, is this really a problem or not in terms of mental health? So I think mental health is thrown up all the time as a, we don't know what we're doing with children kind of sort of, we're lost, basically. But the thing about phones is, I remember when they came out, there was a different panic. It was a panic that if you put it to your head, it's going to get hot and it's going to cook your brain. And we won't know that until 10 years later when they all get brain tumours. They haven't, okay? So we're prone to this kind of panic. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, I very much agree with Joe on EdTech. It's a separate point entirely, but you know, the industry surrounding technology and pushing it into schools is phenomenal. It's a massive industry and it's utterly useless. And I can assure you that I used to make this point a while back, that if you go into a school and ask them where the laptops are, they've hidden them in a cupboard because they're all broken and they don't use them anymore. Right? And every 2 to 3 years, they just buy another lot. They don't know why. They just do it because it's pushed from on top that you should be doing that. And it adds nothing to education. That's a separate point. How do you educate kids is a completely different point. But I think that's really important. But in terms of how you deal with youngsters and mobile phones, you've got to get used to it because they've got them, right? And so we can panic about it and say it's out of control, but then that's us. We're the adults. We have to learn how to be in control.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. If you could pass the mic to whoever is looking after that mic. I was going to move it over to this side, actually, but seeing as you've got it, we'll keep it there for a minute. We're going to have the chap at the back, then we'll come to you. I'm going to take a couple over here, and then we'll come back to the panel. Okay. So, over here, sir.
Hi. Yeah. I'm Keith Jordan. I run an organisation called Our Duty. We support families of children who think they are transgender. A lot of them are corrupted online through their devices. But I agree with what Joe said earlier. The devices are actually a portal to a world, and that world is a dangerous world, but it doesn't have to be dangerous. And I think the solution is probably a kindernet, to coin a phrase. In other words, a whole bunch of IP addresses, which Joe would understand, that is just ring-fenced so the kids you can give a kid a phone which only goes to a certain portion of the internet, which can have the ed tech on, and it can have safe spaces on where the children are not going to get indoctrinated into cults such as the cult of transgenderism. Thank you.
Okay, so we're now bringing trans issue into the debate. I'm not sure if this is going to sort of spiral all over the place. We might. Let's focus on the devices. I take the point you're making, sir. Let's focus on the devices and let's not have a debate about trans, but I think the guy raises an interesting question. Right, we're going to come here, and then if I can have the other mic, I've got two people on the front. One of your daughter, she wants to say something. So unless it's where's the toilet, we're going to go with both of you at the front there. Sorry about that, Mila. Right, so over here, those two, and then we'll come back to the panel.
So I had a question for Molly. Is how much support do you have for people, parents, not because my daughter doesn't have a phone still. She's about the only one. And I would say all across the board, there is no support with that in the way that all parents are kind of think it's bad, but do it. The school thinks it's bad, but do it. They'll use it when they need to. They don't want to say no to the kids. And it's just, we're on our own.
Do you want me to answer now?
Not now. Just hold back, but that's great. Thank you. Right, over here. Two people over here.
Hi. I think sometimes maybe we need to reverse the generations. I find, to my astonishment, that I seem to spend 3 or 4 hours a day on my phone. And I do find the children from the local secondary school are very, very helpful on lunch breaks if I get stuck on something. I do get worried when I see parents on the bus giving their 2- and 3-year-olds in buggies a phone when they cry. And I think these addictions can start very young. Having limited my own children's screen time and told them off for doing things like watching TV with one eye and watching their phone with the other, I now do that. So I think maybe it's not just the kids we need to worry about, it's maybe the older people too.
That's really interesting. I just want to say that if you believe that mobile phones increase social isolation, it's been great for the relationship between me and my mother because I'm around her house sorting out her phone all the time these days. So there is that positive, maybe a little facetious point there. It's Mila, to you.
So I'm in year 5 and I know what it's like. I don't have a smartphone, but I have a small device called an iPod that you can't call on, but you can text. My sister found out, and my homework is just under half of it is actually set on a computer, not necessarily a phone, and it's a really big faff to do all that stuff like generally. So I think we should probably try to stop this because my mum, I know, doesn't agree with this either.
I love this. If you want to make a point and reinforce it, put your daughter in the audience as a plant. That's really good. No, Mina, that's not fair to you because that's your idea. So thank you very much for that. Okay, we're coming back to the panel. We're going to just come down the table, starting with Simon. Panel, respond to any of those points that you want to. Don't feel you've got to respond to everything. Just pick out from that what you want to respond to and reply.
I'll pick up the lady over here who's talking about parents. And we have the fact, which is that we know that depression and anxiety has gone up in young women 16 to 24. It's the only change we've ever seen in any mental health since records began, as they say. I don't know when that was, but it was some time ago. So that's a true fact. And it's gone up by about 4 to 6%, which in population terms is quite big. I made that up, actually. I can't remember what the exact figure is, but it's of that order. You don't know, so it's fine. But it has actually gone up. Now, one of you picked on what I actually think is a more cogent reason for this, a very dramatic change that's happened in society in the last 30 years, which is the distance that children are allowed to play away from their parents. It has gone up or down by around 80 to 85%. Beautiful study in Sheffield, where I come from. And many parents feel very uncomfortable now about not knowing where their child is. At the same time, you have the triumph of the school run, which is anything but a school run. It's the exact opposite. Very few children now walk to school, very few. our children bikes to school. And when we said that, I was called in and I suddenly realized I was having a safeguarding interview. Literally, I'm a fucking consultant psychiatrist. I was having a safeguarding interview. Anyway, we say, look, you know, once they're in school, it's your problem, but getting to school, that's our problem. And that's what we want them to do. And they did. But that is a very significant change. And we see it also in the number of children. I'm a dean at a university at King's, where we have 48,000 students. We see an increase in mental health problems as they arrive at university, which then settles down and comes back to normal by the end of the first term. And partly because, again, I'm going to make this up because I've forgotten what the statistic is, but it's roughly about 20% of our students, this is the first night they've spent away from their parents, going back to what you were saying about, you know, adventure holidays and all that kind of thing. Now, you know, it's a transient thing, but I think that change in the parenting of my generation, and also the generation of a lot of people in this room, by the way, we're all guilty, is, I think, a more likely explanation for this very specific thing we've seen only in about the last decade, which happens to coincide with the rise of social media, but that does not mean it's due to it.
Thank you for that. It's interesting. Another technique, if you don't have a child to put in the audience and just make your statistics up. I love the way this is all going. But more seriously, the more serious point I want to get us to reflect on here is this fear about safety and concern and so on, is that prompting an authoritarian response? Are we becoming more illiberal to deal with our fears of this? And particularly when we think about, like Josephine was talking about, bringing the state into this and saying, well, this is something now you've got to deal with because we're too worried about it. That's something else to think about in the long list of things.
The Danger campaign was the worst thing we ever did for children in our schools, making them frightened of strangers. That was a dreadful campaign.
She's forgotten her phone.
She's got her phone, yes. Okay.
Molly.
Got to get her 3 hours up.
Yeah, I'll see if we can sort that out for you. Yeah, Molly, go ahead.
So yeah, just there are a few points I want to come back to here. So I think the issue of the parents' role in all of this, I mean, there's a massive elephant in the room here, isn't there? In that we are all addicts. Like, so the average adult touches their phone 2,500 times a day. I mean, how is that even possible? You unlock your phone 150 times a day, apparently, on average. So, you know, in the worst possible way, we've become our children's enablers and their coaches. And I think actually there is a serious point here that until we fix that problem, you know, what hope do our kids have? I think the idea, talking about the role of the state, the idea that this is still a matter, all of that said, for individual family and parents' responsibility, for me, we're way, way past that point. I think it has become a cohort-wide problem. And, you know, with the best will in the world, you could deny your child a smartphone, as a few of us probably will. But actually, when all their friends are on Snapchat and WhatsApp and blah, 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 you know, that creates other problems. And I think for me, the best analogy I've heard on this was from Miriam Cates, actually. And she said it is a little like asking a child to go and cross the road by themselves. But by the way, there's no road safety rules and there's no speed limits and cars can drive wherever they want. And that is how I feel where we are with smartphones now. I think to your question of how much support do we have, it's been a very weird one because when we started it, we thought it would be really, really controversial. What we have found is there has been almost universal public support, particularly from the media, actually, which came as a surprise, both kind of the right wing and left wing. The pushback we had at first was from parents who had children who had phones already. And we had an awful lot of, defensive, it will never happen. My kid's got a phone. You can't be, how can you be saying, take my child's phone away? Of course, that's not what we were saying. I sense, and quite a lot of that reaction came from people within our own team, actually, as well. So it was a really difficult one to navigate. But having navigated it, it's really noticeable that that people seem to have maybe had their eyes open to maybe it is possible to row back. And, maybe we're not going to change it for the 14 and 15-year-olds. Maybe we don't want to do that anyway. But maybe for the 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds coming through, like, there is a chance we can create a different path here. And I think the support from the parents in loose terms of primary age kids has been overwhelming, actually. And we've been taken aback, actually, by everyone seems to agree there is a problem. And I think by and large, I know there are different views, many people, I think, would say that we are at the point where parents need help.
Okay, thank you. This is the battle of ideas, so I want to encourage anyone who does want to do some of the pushback that you said you were expecting but didn't encounter. If there's somebody out there that wants to mount a really strong defence of giving kids digital devices because of the freedom and so on that they represent, let's hear from you, because I'm worried that we don't have any of that voice in the room at the moment. We're gonna move on. Elliot, I don't know if you want to sort of pick up on some of those more kind of positive things. You were sort of saying before that you've seen the sort of mental health downsides and so on. Maybe in what you want to say, I'd like to hear some of the positives of you work with this media. You've built your career out of it. Maybe we need a voice on that, but I'm going to leave it up to you. Respond in the way you want to.
Yeah, well, I think on the point about Kindernet, that's quite interesting, and that's obviously for kids' safety, and that assumes that the government has the best intentions for you. Like, for example, if we had the Kindernet during COVID, I, as a healthy teenager, would have been told to take the vaccine to stop transmission. So that's another rabbit hole not to go down. So I don't know how effective the Kindernet would be, but I appreciate the point, and I think there do need to be more limitations on the internet. You can access anything at age 8. Don't ask me how I know that, but there's a lot you can access. So that's dangerous. But going back to actually defending the internet, there are millions and millions of videos, for example, on YouTube, and you can learn anything. If you want to learn something, you can go online and do it. I've learned piano, guitar, whatever. I've learned how to film people, and now I do that as a career. So I think it's really important not to reduce it to the Kindernet with sort of bite-sized videos, because then you're actually halting the progress of some kids who are ready to maybe take a step a bit further. So I think there's something in that of restricting more things, but ultimately it's important to get exposed to situations that push you outside your comfort zone. And the internet does that brilliantly. So yeah, limitations need to be put in place, and I agree, but there's so much reward if you look in the right areas. And maybe this is a reflection more generally on the failure of the education system as a whole. If we were taught more critical thinking and seeing the world, and
or is it just a sort of parental issue? Is this something that you think should be put in the hands of individual parents to deal with, and we shouldn't?
But how are my parents going to teach me how to look at phones and not see the delusions on there when they've never grown up with that? I think there are certain key things that we can be taught, as said, critical thinking, that will limit delusions that take place on social media. So again, parents are responsible for that too, but I think there's a conversation to be had about an entire new subject, maybe digital literacy, that teaches things that prepares you for going on the internet.
Okay, boomer parents out there, if there's any parents out there who feel, actually, I don't know about phones, but I do know how to bring my kids up, and I do know how to show them how to use it, speak to us. Okay, Joe, go for it. Tell us.
I'll try and draw some of those threads together as best I can, quickly as I can. I love that expression, by the way, Moni, dumb phones. There's a reason why the industry talks about refreshing computers, because they've got the shelf life of a lettuce. And that's why they call it refresh and not rebuy or now, the parenting thing, the parenting thing is massive, isn't it? And it covers so many things. But I want to try and do what Gareth is trying to urge me to do, which is give you a sort of positive little story. It's made me realise this. I brought up 2 little girls by myself. I worry terribly sometimes that I didn't handle mobile phones with them very carefully. My oldest daughter's a professional cyclist, and she has her own YouTube channel, and it's the most charming thing, and she gets the loveliest comments on it. And it really is a positive example. And the only other thing I'd like to say is I really loved the fact that Myla seemed to underscore everything I'd been saying, because whether you like it or not, I don't know if some of you saw an essay I wrote this week in the Critic about the future of schooling. State schooling is going down the pan. In my lifetime, I think you'll see it, the demise of state schooling, and the technology will drive it. It'll be a 4-day week, 1 day on Zoom, because that's the thing, that's where the power lies. The power lies between the big businesses and the politicians and the people they give the purse strings to. And that was, what I heard from Myla, a little plea that she'd really like a different kind of schooling.
That's really interesting. The idea that, like it or not, technology is coming into schools more and more and more, into education. Josephine, what's your perspective on that? Do the phones go in your drawer, you lock them away? Is that the end of technology in your room, in your teaching pattern, or are you noticing more and more that you're having to use devices even if the phones are in the locker?
Well, we have computing lessons where they learn various things. At the moment, this term, they're learning coding using Scratch. Unfortunately, Scratch is quite outdated. And one thing you'll find in schools is that the technology actually isn't that up to date often. We've got iPads in school, which the children use with the supervision of the teachers. And the children often choose to do that as go on the computers as one of the choices in golden time. So it's there, but it isn't everything that's going on in school. Obviously, we focus very much on English, which involves reading and all sorts of other things. There's lots of play in the early years, discovery through play, through outdoors. So it isn't like everything's online and everything's focused on that. The thing that slightly worries me is the term becoming an addict, because it does sound, it's very, very strong. And I think to myself, when Molly said we're addicts, I thought, well, yeah, I do go on my phone a lot. I have self-diagnosed myself with cancer quite a few times. But I don't go on my phone a lot to look at negative things. I go on there to read Substack articles. I go on there to check train times. A lot of the things that we access today, we access through our phones, and that's how we live our lives. I mean, people were talking in the last session about banking apps and all of those kind of things. So I think we do need to be reasonable about what we're actually using our phones for, and be reasonable about the fact that, as Elia's proven, children are not blank slates. Children have various different interests. It may be that somebody's interested in transgender and then they go online and it says a lot of what they want to hear. It might be that somebody, has a preponderance towards becoming anorexic. They go online, they search for that. It really just depends what it is that we're trying to focus on. On the question of parents and the need to keep their children safe, well, when it comes to school trips, I've just been through the hell that is bushcraft, where we take the children camping and I have to camp too. And they don't have phones at all. This is year 5 and 6. They don't have phones at all. And we don't even have a signal in the forest. So their first experience at the age of 10 and 11 is without their parents. And I think that's a very healthy thing, that they're away from their parents. The parents go along with it. We send a message every day about what we've been up to. And we do that, through technology. Some schools have Twitter accounts keeping the parents up to date about what's going on. We are not their parents. We want their parents to know they're safe and well and we're looking after them and they're having fun and all of that kind of thing. And technology is really good for doing that. Also on the question of safety, this lady here who's just gone was talking about how she's always on her phone. And I always get told off by my daughter, who's 20, to come off my phone when we're out. And when we were in Italy, she didn't want to go out and I wanted to go and sit in a bar and have a spritz. And she said, Mum, have you heard of an app called Life 360? I said, don't know what you're talking about. She said, well, it's when you can track somebody. She said, can I put you on that? So she could track me when I was sitting in a bar in the middle of Italy. So I think the safety issue isn't just about parents worrying about the safety of their children. I think we live in a culture where we are worried about the risks. And I think we're fetishizing mobile phones and seeing them as a portal to all the risks that we're worrying about.
Thank you very much. I mean, that so many points, but that point about addiction is really interesting. Catherine Burblesing is, a notable head teacher in the country. She's, I think, sort of thrown her weight behind your campaign, Molly, but she likens smartphones to crack cocaine. Is that an appropriate statement, or is that sort of causing a moral panic? I want to know what you all think. So, right, we're going to go out with the microphone. So we've got one here and we've got one here. Right, okay. So there's a gentleman right at the back corner. If you can bring the mic round this side and yep, he's got his hand up there. So if we can get a mic to him, and this one, if you could come to this gentleman over here, great. And then we'll come to the guy in front of the guy who's got the mic for the third one. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, just like to look at the relationship between some of the things that Simon talked about, the end of the school run, kids not getting out as much. And there has been kind of a little bit of a, I don't know how conscious it is, a bit of a trade-off with parents enticing their kids to stay at home with tech, with games consoles and stuff like that. And that they're spending a lot less time outside due to stranger danger campaigns and what have you. But I can always remember reading one article that concluded that kids were spending loads of times on the phone. There was all sorts of things going on those phones, but they weren't addicted to their phones. They're addicted to their friends, and that's the phone is the portal that they can access their friends on, because then they're not allowed out to see them so much.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, if you pass the mic forward, but we're going to take this chap over here first. Yeah.
Just following on the addiction theme, is there much of a literature on effective forms of digital detox?
Interesting. Over to Simon in a little while for that one. Right, to this gentleman here. Meanwhile, if we could get the mic to the lady in the black top in the second row there. And when you're finished, if you could pass that mic forward to the lady in front of you. Thank you.
I'm sorry, trying to be too convoluted. I come to it. I teach secondary, and so by the time they come to us, there's quite a big mobile phone presence, and we've quite often chatted in the staff room about the mobile phones as being a tool rather than something like the ring that wants to be found. It's a tool that you can pick up and put, and use it for your own ends, and. We're always amazed at how much, when it comes to the social side, the kids don't know how to interact with each other. When it comes to conflict, when it comes to sort of like dealing with problems, and they'll say things online to each other that you wouldn't dream of saying into each other in face, because a fight would ensue, because some really horrific, horrible stuff. They'll make videos about each other and they'll post them, and is it how much of it's a bigger issue about teaching kids how to deal with conflict, how to deal with things that are difficult that they find upsetting, but isn't ultimately harmful, and broader than that.
Sorry to cut in, but do you see that as part of your job to manage that, or do you think that's somebody else's job?
It's difficult, because I was a head of year in my previous school, and my entire inbox was always, this person's posted that video about that person. And it's like, well, was it done from school computers, or was it done at home in his bedroom? And it was but then at my current school, it's very much about, but you're working with parents to resolve a conflict. If it escalates outside and there's some sort of fight and the kids get hurt. And so they take a much more hands-on, much more pastoral view of it. But what I think the reason I mentioned as a teacher is because what we also go away at the beginning of year 8. We go down to Cornwall, and there is a no phones policy. The kids are not allowed to bring their phones, and there are no fights. There aren't any real arguments, and the amount of people that will have beef in the classroom that end up really getting on by the end of the week, because actually what they might have said on a phone would get them into a fight is really quite interesting, and it kind of ties in with what was being said about the bullying.
Very interesting, thank you. Other teachers, I don't want to make this just about education, but if there are other teachers in the room, one of the things I want to hear about is to what extent do you back off from saying to a child, give me your phone, you're not supposed to have that phone out, because it's too much of a high stakes confrontation, kids are just going to dig in. If there's teachers in the room with a view on that, please let us know. Or indeed, anyone that needs to, work with young people and challenge those kind of ideas. Okay, we're coming to this lady here. If that microphone can go to right on the end here, there's two ladies actually. There's one on the end here, and then one just a couple of seats in. So I'm sorry, it's the lady who's got the microphone in the second row who's about to speak. She's going to pass that forward. The lady behind, I'm sorry, we will come back to you shortly, madam, but if we can just send it over this side.
Do I speak or do I pass it?
You pass it. But it will come back to you, I promise. Okay. Lady here, yeah.
Thank you. I'm really interested on the research on mental health and links with screens. And Simon, I think you may have answered this question already, but I'm really interested in the views of the rest of the panel. So the meta-analyses, the big studies of studies, tend to show that there's only kind of 1 to 2% of the variance in mental health explained by screens, which is a really interesting finding. And there's a theory that it might be a U-shaped relationship. So kids that don't have access to mobile phones at all might be in resource-poor households, which explains the link then. And then there's a link with kids that spend a lot of time on screens at the other end. And then that's kind of obscured by the kind of group in the middle and the balancing out. And there's another theory that maybe it's because it's really good for some kids because they use it to learn photography or have all of the connections, and it's really bad for others because of the algorithms that take them into dreadful places and kind of mental health and eating disorders. And I just wondered if the panel has an opinion on this, or whether it's not to do with any of these and it's just that there's no relationship because it doesn't exist.
That's really interesting. You bring in the idea that Simon was mentioning about maybe poverty and the access that kids have to these devices. One of the pieces I read in preparing for this was written by the daughter-in-law, I think, of Prince Michael of Kent, who was suggesting get the devices out of school. That's probably okay for the daughter-in-law of Prince Michael of Kent, but you know, if you're a poor kid, maybe that's your only contact with these kind of devices. Anyway, we're moving over here first, and then we'll go over this side.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think it's part of the catastrophization. Everything is catastrophized around bringing up children, and this is just the device, and the mobile phone is another example. And I also think that there's an element of snobbery and class about this, because it is dictating how parents should behave, what they should do. And you see it on food, you see it on all sorts of things. And I think parents are good enough and capable enough to do it themselves. So I've got 3 teenagers. If I go out for dinner with them, I say, take your phone, put it away, we're having a chat. They're addicted to their phones. They love their phones. Addiction, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but they love their phones. And it is a way of them connecting with their friends and having a great time. It's a positive thing. There's nothing worse. You remember back in the day where you'd make a connection, you'd say, right, we're going to meet at this bus stop at this time. I mean, gosh, they're so lucky. They know exactly where everyone is. They've got a little avatar and they know exactly that person's on that road. So technology is a wonderful thing. Why are we making their lives so miserable by catastrophizing everything? Why don't we have a bit of positivity and also not infantilize them? When you're a teenager, you're on the cusp of adulthood. What's this kinder bloody thing? I mean, no kid would want to be in that. That's why they're vaping and they're doing all this stuff, because they're teenagers and they want to be adults. And why don't we encourage them? Because adulthood is a great thing.
That's great. Thank you very much. Very much for the defence that I was looking for. Anyone over here want to speak? There's someone right over in the corner there. And if once you finish with the mic, you can pass it forward to the lady, also in the black, with the scarf on the top. Once you finish, but we're coming over here first, I believe, and then we're moving down to you. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about the role of the parents, but we haven't really reflected on the fact that parents can be models. So if children see their parents reading in their free time, they will likely be doing the same. But we cannot be surprised if they see their parents be on their phone 24/7, that the children will do exactly the same thing.
Really interesting point. Degree of hypocrisy, possibly. The mic to you, yes.
So on your point about, it's this bubble-sing to me because I go to the school she runs.
Fantastic.
So she runs this thing that we could go to after school called digital detox, where we put in our phones for a week. And because we go to a really academically rigorous school, it allows us to get on with homework, revising, reading, developing that critical thinking skills, so that when we pass 16, we can actually engage in social media in a healthy way. And I mean, the results of her school and of her system and of her policies regarding social media and phones have been proven to be effective in terms of like my year group and the year group, who's next to me, top not only the country in Progress 8 school, but like the whole history of this country, we got the top Progress 8 school. And I think like if I did not have those boundaries, I do think that I don't think I would have achieved what I did and what our year group achieved. And I just want to see what the panel thinks about Miss Bubblesing and her views on that and her success with banning smartphones.
Just to be clear, do you agree with her that they're as addictive as crack cocaine? You absolutely would agree with that. Thank you for that. Yeah, no, I haven't forgotten the lady in the room, but thanks, Joe. Right, we're coming over here for those two. If that mic can make its way to that lady who was going to speak earlier on, that's great. And then we'll come back to the panel. Thank you.
First of all, thank you everyone for all the great comments. But I just want to say, as a teenager myself, that you have to give a certain degree of trust and freedom to your children for them to grow. Like, if you teach a kid how to ride a bike, if you never let go of the back of the bike, they never know how to ride it. And also, I just want to open this question to everyone, is that how old do you think is a kid allowed full access to a mobile phones? Like no time limits, no app restrictions, no charging your phones in my room overnight, no that kind of thing. Just give you a phone, here's a mobile plan, here's a charging cord, do whatever you want with it. How old do you think that a kid should have that? But a reminder to everyone that in the UK, usually kids at 16 to 17-ish, they do their GCSEs, which then they do their A-levels at 18, which then they go to university at like 18 or 19. So when do you think is a suitable age for them to have that kind of freedom?
Brilliant question. Where do you draw the line? Thank you very much. Yes, if you could pass the mic forward to this lady here. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello. A point that's been on my mind through the thing is we keep interchanging content with technology. I think the phone is morally neutral, ethically neutral. All content is just not created the same. I think like safe screens and being able to judge what is the motive behind this content is really, really important to differentiate between those things. Another big thing for me as a parent and keeping, computer games out of our home was, nothing perhaps wrong with a computer game. What are you not doing? What are you not doing as a child when you're 3 or 4 hours on a screen, whether it's just playing games, doing something harmless? You're not doing a great wealth of things that a whole catalogue of child developers, development experts have told us children need to be doing in order to, develop, playing outside, playing with siblings, conflict resolution in the home, parents' interactions. All of you and many of the parents in this room are probably good parents, proactive, involved in the child's life. But for a great number of children, there isn't that coaching. I know technology is here to stay. I'm going to teach my children how to be safe, but that's going to take time and thought. And another thing, this whole parental responsibility just gets kicked about the ball. Is it me or is it the schools? Is it the state? When it suits people. And I think it's really naive to think that excessive screen time doesn't have side effects, unwanted side effects, just across. Oh, and the whole social media data thing, just one more point.
If we could move on, because I don't want to bring more people in, but thank you. There's some really interesting points there. Conflict resolution in the homes, presumably by taking phones off kids, I would imagine. But anyway, this lady here who's waited ages.
Yes, I want to address you, the speaker, who's talking about the wonders of education. Well, I used to be an educator, and during the lockdown, we had to teach. I was teaching from 16-year-olds to adults in an FE college. And we decided it was shit because, sorry to be so crude, but that was the word we used. Basically, it was good in terms of kind of one-to-one. One-to-one. But, and it was also fairly good in you were showing something, say you had a document which everybody was looking at. In every other way, it was useless. And it was particularly useless at the lower levels. They could not cope with it, to the point that I said to one of their heads, I said, look, I've got to get into a classroom. You know, with these kids are never going to pass doing this. Okay, so I completely disagree.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, great points. We're going to come back to the panel. We're going to start with Josephine and come this way down. Now, I want to go out again and get some more in. So we're going to have like a minute each, all right? Just pick something and talk about that, but don't try and cover everything. Josephine.
Okay. I love Catherine Birbalsingh, but what I love about her is she has authority. She knows what she wants for her school and she sees it through. And I think more head teachers should do the same. And well done on your top scoring. I agree with you. I was teaching online. I hated every moment of it. And actually, that was one thing that Molly and I, well, we've agreed on lots of other things, but Molly and I agreed. We were both very active in opening schools up again. I totally agree with you. It's much better to have children together, socialising, interacting in the classroom. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I agree. I don't think mobile phones per se should be in the classroom. I spend my life removing distractions from children so that they can focus on their learning and they can learn to focus for longer on their learning. And those distractions go from, can I get a tissue? Can I sharpen my pencil? Can I go to the toilet, please? I've got an itch. Can I do this? Can I do that? I spend my time removing those distractions so that they can learn for longer. Obviously, my lessons are really interesting too. Just on the issue of computer games, when I was doing the research, I found a very interesting report from the OECD that said that children who played computer games, their maths and English levels went up. So it does make you wonder whether... Was it the OECD?
They are one of the biggest pushers of that.
Anyway. But the point is, right, that everything in moderation is what I would say. So I don't want anything banned. I want things in moderation. And I really, really agree with the point that was made over there. Parents often say to me, my children don't read. Why? How can I get my children to read? Can you change their book really quickly? La, 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 la. And then those parents don't read. Children read if the parents read. Parents are very good, are very important role models to children. And I think teachers are very important role models to children. And I think the bringing up of children is very much something that we should have a relationship with parents on. We are not their parents. We're in loco parentis while they're in school. But obviously we need to negotiate which lines we draw. In school, you have to have fixed rules. When it comes to what age do you give phones to children, I think at home, that's something that you negotiate with your child depending on your child's character and how you feel about the technology.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Joe, I don't know if you'll pick up on that point about the OECD.
No, I won't. I'll try not to reiterate things. I'll try not to repeat things. Okay, a stat that I'm reasonably confident about, Pew Research not so long ago, 47% of 11 to 16-year-olds in America said they were on the internet constantly. Okay, now just pick up a little bit of what Josephine said then. Best piece of educational research I've ever read, books in the home. The correlation between the number of books in the home and how successful you are in school, fantastic. Better than your parents' academic achievement, better than your income, better than everything. And answer your question about what age, 16. So you asked the question, I think 16 is probably, 16 you've got to sort of let go and trust them. And one other thing, as I said in my speech at the beginning, I read tons of educational research for clients. I've never read any educational research that's ever convinced me that screen use was a positive learning activity. None. I've read loads that suggest it isn't.
Really interesting. I work in online education. That's really interesting. Okay, Elliot, off to you.
I was in year 10 doing my GCSEs when lockdown hit and we had to study from home, and I've pretty much blocked all of it out of my memory because it was so horrible. We learned nothing during lockdown, and I think there's a slight nuance with the different skills that you can learn. So I'm sat here talking about how my career has been made by technology, but that's because the field that I'm in, I can look at certain skills and I can copy and I can practice. I think with slightly deeper skills where it requires a bit more of a push, especially with maybe lower ability kids that need that extra time.
Do you mean more academic kind of subjects?
Yeah.
The difference between physics and history and maybe just learning how to do photography.
Exactly. So especially with maths, for me personally, I didn't learn anything during lockdown because I struggled with maths a little bit more and I needed the teacher to actually personally explain it to me. So when they just put up a system and you copy the system online on computers, you're not learning the actual mathematics, you're just learning a process. In terms of...
No, that's fine.
Okay, that's fine.
There, because I need to move on because I do want to bring people in more. Thanks very much, Elliot. Molly.
Sorry.
Good.
So yeah, I mean, I think there seems to be a theme here about appropriate use of, in particular, social media and technology. And I think, when we were framing this campaign, we actually started it by thinking about calling for a ban on social media, as some of the American states have. So, no social media for under 16, say. And we were turned off, actually, by that view for the very reason that Elliot has talked about, that actually there is a valid use, I think, for social media. I mean, us for them wouldn't exist. In some ways, I owe this phase of my career to social media as well. And I think there is a positive, or can be a positive. I think the issue for me comes in when children have uncontrolled access and it becomes taken out of parental supervision. And I think as much actually for the family as well, we haven't really talked about it in a family context, but there is nothing more depressing, I think, than going for dinner and sitting next to or seeing, a table full of parents and children all head down in phones. And for me, that is an image that just sums up where we are with this. And it is really, really, really sad. And that...
Molly, sorry to cut in, but do you see that as a societal issue and you're trying to sort of draw a line with the kind of younger generation? In other words, do you think everybody's affected by this and you want to stop it happening to the next generation of kids? Or do you think it's something that is particular to childhood?
No, I think it's a societal issue. I think we'll look back at how far we let this go and be really quite shocked. In the way we have done with other substances, usually we talk about it in this context, don't we, where it's gone too far and we've rode back. And I think that is what will happen and is happening already in some countries with social media and smartphones.
Thank you. Okay, Simon.
Okay, I mean, one boring boffin point. One of the reasons why some of the literature is confusing is we do know that people, not only do they wrongly record their amount of screen time compared to what they actually do, because a lot of look at that, it's also systematically biased. So people are much more likely to overestimate than underestimate. And second, when they're feeling bad, like depressed or anxious, etc., they are also greater users. So we call that reverse causality. So the depression makes them a greater user as well, which is also a bias. So there's some reasons why we can overestimate these associations. I think the 47% always on the internet is highly unlikely to be true when you look at studies of what people actually do, which is not what they say they do. And then the professor of psychiatry point, I really don't like people saying this is like cocaine or heroin. And I think the people who do that have not had a family member or a child who is addicted to cocaine or heroin. So I just wish people wouldn't do that, because it's just another world of pain and misery and horror. And it's not the same as what we're talking about. So I just wish people wouldn't do that.
Okay, thank you. Right. We have a very limited time, so I'm just going to take some quick points. If you want to say something, you've got to make it quick. I am going to move us on. Where are the mics? If this mic can come to this chap here, please be brief, sir. I don't know why I say that to you, but please be brief. The striped top.
How brief should I start? So I work for a company and we basically help schools ban mobile phones from school. We work with 250 schools in the country now. We work in the independent sector and the state sector across a massive demographic of different kids from different backgrounds. It's overwhelmingly positive in every single case. Every single headmaster, teacher tells us that what we are doing in these schools is completely turning them around. So my question for Josephine is, you say that you want to get rid of the distractions in the classroom. You say you want to get rid of mobile phones. In fact, you do that in your own school. But so why is your point that you wouldn't want to ban them across all schools in secondary schools if you want to have these distraction-free environments in your own classroom? I find that just strange.
That's a brilliant question. Thank you very much, lady in the striped top. This mic here. You've already spoken, so I'm going to take this person here in the black, the lady in the black.
So I home educate, and I have a quite a controversial, I suppose, attitude. I let my kids be on screens a lot of the time, but I say, when you stop, you have to stop. And they respect that. And it means that the screens are not like a lovely treat that they can't wait to use. And when we go out for meals, we have critical thinking discussions. They do not have their devices out because they have those boundaries in place, but they also learn a lot from the screens. So I twist it around. I don't make the screens like this enticing, addictive thing, but they might already be addicted. I don't know.
And this is where we're at, that you feel that might be a controversial point. That's really interesting because I think many people would agree with you. Mike, back to the person behind you, this lady here.
I was in year 8 when COVID started, and I know for a fact if I didn't have social media, I would have been a lot more depressed than if I had social media. I was 12 years old, and it kind of puts it into the fact of if I had no communication with the outside world apart from my family, it would have had a lot worse of an impact than it already had. So it's the question of why should it be delayed for other people when us having it when we're younger actually helps us more?
That's a really, really good point. Spoken from the heart as well. Thank you. Sir, and the gentleman here, if you can pass the mic back to him. Yep.
Hi, I've been to, for my sins, hundreds of education conferences in my time, and I've heard the same speech again and again at every single bloody one, which is that because kids use smartphones in their home lives, well, schools have to reflect that. And because otherwise schools are old-fashioned with the dinosaurs, et cetera, et cetera. So, that's an idea that's around that policymakers are sharing with each other and taking seriously. I don't know to what degree it's actually filtered through to classes, but if there's a problem, then look to the source, and it's that idea.
Thank you very much. This gentleman here, and there's a lady at the back. If you can pass the mic to her, that's going to be the last one because I need to bring the panel back in. Sir.
So I work as a computer science teacher in a secondary school, and the impact that I see that phones have is actually a negative one on kids' problem-solving skills, because the user interfaces that are designed on a phone are designed with extremely high levels of abstraction, where the kids don't have to think about things like file management, where they're putting things on their phone. It's all made far too easy for them. Their problem-solving skills, when it comes to sort of an actual desktop computer, it turns out it's actually hindering rather than helping.
That's a really important point. Thank you very much for that. Okay, we've got the last point here, and then panel, we're coming back in the order that you spoke at the start. Yes.
So you've mentioned safety. The one thing I would also mention is privacy, that often by the time children get phones, their whole lives have been published by their parents. So how do we expect children to balance it when parents struggle?
What a lovely line. Their lives have been published by their parents. That's great. Okay, panel, we've not got very much time at all, just a few very quick words. Molly.
I think it's really interesting, actually, listening to this. There seems to be something of a consensus around the negative effect of EdTech in schools, which I hadn't expected. So I think that might be the next campaign. It's something that we are experiencing firsthand with Mila and my youngest as well, actually, at age 7. They all, well, not all their homework, but a lot of the homework and a lot of the teaching is on iPads. And as far as I can see, all it is adding is distraction for her and argument for us, because it undoes all our good work. So, if anyone wants to help with an anti-EdTech campaign, send me an email.
The campaigns are shooting out left, right and centre. Thank you very much for that, Molly. Simon.
Okay, we need to remember that the main determinant of our mental well-being is and always has been the strength of our social networks. And just to remind you what the film on Facebook was called, it was called The Social Network. Now, the fact that many networks now are going virtual rather than what the coroner recently said, real, I'm not sure what a real network is composed to that, is not surprising and is to be welcomed, because strong social networks are what protect us. Now, clearly, there are also negative effects. No one would deny that. And I don't know who's read the report of the Molly Russell coroner recently. There's a clear and obvious link between use of Instagram and a terrible tragedy. There's no doubt about that either. But it's an unusual case, but nevertheless it has happened. And the third thing to say, I wish we'd had bloody social networks when I was at university, because I had a lot more sex, or indeed any sex at all would have been good, because we didn't. And I'm sure my children have had a lot better. And the fourth final point is trying to take... Okay.
Okay. I'm really sorry, but we've got to take Joe in now. I'm really sorry to cut you off.
I'll be very glad.
It's all right.
I'm just going to repeat, really, just to reiterate something I was saying. I think a lot of the comments have sort of underlined it, really. You're going to see the demise of what we all think of as schooling, and it'll be driven by technology unless the teaching profession wakes up and starts fighting its own corner. And it hasn't. In my entire life, it's just got weaker and weaker and weaker.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you for being brief. Elliot.
I completely agree with the point on everything made super easy. People are learning how to be followers now and be reactive versus proactive, and the incentives are there as well. So you're not going to watch a video that says, this is how you get abs. You work hard and you diet for months and months. You're going to watch a video that says, this is how to get abs in 5 minutes. And all content is moving that way. So people are sort of forgetting the difficulty and the struggle that they have to go to actually earn the things they want to do. And they see all these influencers living their lives, but they don't see the hard work that goes on for years before that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Josephine.
Just in response to the question that was raised about not having them in classrooms, I'm very happy for schools to decide to do that. The point that I'm making is it's about adult autonomy and for us not calling on other people to make decisions for us. Head teachers should make the decisions for their schools. Parents should make the decisions for their parents. And I think the danger is it starts to encroach on us. So for child protection reasons, we now not only have filtering in our school, we have monitoring. What the children look at is monitored. They have their own logins and we get reports. But not only that, they're now monitoring what the teachers are looking at. So 2 teachers in my school, one got a report based on the fact that they'd typed in weapons and the other one dating and companionship. They went home, they asked their children if they'd been online, they asked their husband if they touched the computer, completely paranoid about what they were doing online. And I think this is where we're heading. If we do not take authority as teachers, and I agree with Joe, as teachers, we need to step up and say we want a good education for our children. And as parents, we need to say we're going to be the ones who make the decisions for our children. It's about adult authority and autonomy from the state.
Thank you very much. I was really worried that there were going to be so many themes that we wouldn't sort of get any sense out of this debate, but I've really enjoyed this. Thank you to the panel and thank you all for asking such brilliant points. Can we give them a really big round of applause? Thank you.